Let's talk about a killer. A ghost. A story that gets under your skin because it doesn't have an ending. This is the story of the Axeman of New Orleans. It happened a long time ago, over 100 years back, but it feels fresh because it was so strange, so terrifying, and so unsolved. To really get it, you have to picture New Orleans in 1918. The city was a mess, but a beautiful one. It was loud, sticky, and crowded. Soldiers were coming home from the Great War. People were dying from the Spanish flu. It was a time of immense relief and immense fear, all at once. The air was thick with coal smoke and the smell of the river. And everywhere there was music. Ragtime was bleeding into a new sound, a wild improvisational sound people were starting to call jazz. It was the city's heartbeat. The story starts in the Italian-American neighborhoods. These were tight-knit communities full of grocers, laborers, families who had come to America looking for something better. They often kept to themselves, they worked hard and lived simply, and they were the ones the Axeman came for. It began on a Thursday in May 1918. Joseph Maggio and his wife Catherine ran a small grocery store with a little apartment in the back. They were well-liked, quiet people. That morning, Joseph's brothers came to check on him. They were supposed to be working together. They knocked on the door. No answer. They forced their way in. What they found was a nightmare. The place was soaked in blood. Joseph and Catherine were dead in their bed. Their throats had been cut with a straight razor. But that wasn't the worst of it. Their heads had been crushed by an axe. The killer had used an axe that belonged to the Maggios, leaving it behind, covered in their blood. The police found the straight razor in the house, too. It belonged to Joseph's brother Andrew, who had a barber shop next door. For a moment, suspicion fell on him. But it didn't stick. The real clue, the one that would become the killer's signature, was a chiseled-out panel on the back door. That's how he got in. Quietly. He didn't break the door down. He just removed a piece of it and slipped inside. Robbery wasn't the motive. There was money and jewelry left untouched. This was something else. There's something personal and vicious. The city was horrified, but they thought it was a one-off. A terrible, isolated crime. They were wrong. Just a month later, it happened again. Louis Bessumer and his mistress, Harriet Lowe, were attacked in their home, which was also part of a grocery store. An intruder got in and attacked them with a hatchet, another weapon found at the scene. They were both found bleeding and barely conscious. Bessumer had a fractured skull. Lowe's face was a ruin. This time, there were survivors, sort of. When the police arrived, Harriet Lowe was able to speak. She blamed Louis Bessumer. She said he was a German spy. Remember, this was right at the end of World War I. Accusations like that were taken seriously. The police arrested Bessumer, but the evidence was thin. His injuries were severe. Well, it didn't make sense. A few days later, Harriet Lowe changed her story. She said it was a dark-skinned man who attacked them. Then she died from her injuries. Bessumer was eventually cleared, but the investigation was a confused wreck. The police had conflicting stories, a dead witness, and no real leads. The only thing that was the same was the chiseled panel on the back door. A pattern was starting to form. The city started to get scared. This wasn't just a random murder anymore. This was a prowler, a man who came in the night. In August, the Axeman struck again. This time, it was a woman named Anna Schneider. She was 8 months pregnant. She woke up in the middle of the night and saw a dark figure standing over her bed. Then, pain. The man hit her in the face with a lamp, splitting her head open. Her screams woke the neighbors. The man fled. Miraculously, Anna survived, and so did her baby, who was born healthy 2 days later. She couldn't give a good description of her attacker, just a dark, looming shape. He was a phantom. After Anna Schneider, things went quiet for a while. Maybe people started to think it was over. Maybe the police had scared him off. But then, in the spring of 1919, the terror came back with a vengeance. On the night of March 10th, 1919, the Cortimiglia family was attacked. Charles Cortimiglia, his wife Rosie, and their 2-year-old daughter Mary. They were Italian immigrants, grocers, just like the others. A neighbor heard screaming and ran over. He found a horrific scene. Charles was on the floor, bleeding. Rosie was in the doorway, holding her dead child. Little Mary had been killed instantly by a blow from an axe. Rosie and Charles were rushed to the hospital. They were both in critical condition, but Rosie was conscious, and she told the police she knew who did it. She named their neighbors Orlando Giordano and his teenage son Frank. She said they attacked them. The police arrested the Giordanos. It seemed like a breakthrough, but it felt wrong to a lot of people. The Giordanos were neighbors, friends of the family. Why would they do something so monstrous? Still, based on Rosie's word, they were charged with murder. Orlando was sentenced to life in prison, where Frank was sentenced to hang. But Rosie Cortimiglia was a survivor. She was tough. As she recovered, her story started to fall apart. She eventually admitted she had lied. She was confused, in shock, and terrified. She couldn't remember who attacked her, so she blamed the neighbors out of panic or maybe some old grudge. We'll never know for sure. But her confession was enough. The Giordanos were released. The police were back at square one, and the Axeman was still out there. Right after the Cortimiglia attack, something happened that cemented the Axeman in legend forever. A letter appeared. It was supposedly from the killer himself. It was sent to the newspapers, and they published it. The letter was bizarre, arrogant, and chilling. It was addressed to esteemed mortal. The writer claimed he wasn't human. He said he was a demon, a spirit from hell. He talked about the angel of death. He said he was the Axeman's earthly brother. He bragged about his power, how he could pass through walls and doors like the morning mist. He claimed the police were foolish for trying to catch him, and then came the part that made him famous. He said he was a music lover. Specifically, he loved jazz. He wrote that he had a proposition for the people of New Orleans. He was planning to visit the city again on a specific night, the following Tuesday at 12:15 in the morning. He said he would spare the people in any home where a jazz band was playing. He wrote, "I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe." Imagine reading that in the newspaper. A demon is coming to your city, and the only thing that can save you is music. The city's reaction was one of the most remarkable things about this whole story. Some people were terrified. They locked their doors, said their prayers, and hid. But many, many more did exactly what the letter said to do. They decided to party. On that Tuesday night, New Orleans exploded with sound. The dance halls were packed to the rafters. As professional bands were booked solid. People who couldn't afford a full band got a piano player. People who couldn't afford a piano player played records on their phonographs. Every house, from the richest mansions to the poorest shacks, was filled with the sound of jazz. The city fought back against fear with music. It was a city-wide party to keep the devil away. And it worked. No one was attacked that night. The Axeman, if he was listening, was either satisfied or scared off by the noise. The night of the jazz party became a legendary event. It was the moment the killer went from being a simple murderer to a piece of folklore. But the Axeman wasn't done. The jazz party was in March. The attacks had paused for a few months. Then, in August, a grocer named Steve Boca was found in his bedroom, his head split open. He managed to stumble to a friend's house before collapsing. He couldn't describe his attacker. He died a few days later. The back door panel had been chiseled out. In September, a young woman named Sarah Lamont was attacked. She was found unconscious in her bed with severe head injuries. An axe was found on the front lawn. She survived, but she had no memory of the attack. Again, the back door panel was chiseled out. The final known attack happened in October 1919. A grocer named Mike Pepitone was sleeping when his wife heard a noise. She ran into the bedroom and saw a large man fleeing the room. Mike Pepitone was on the floor, bleeding from a massive head wound. He died shortly after. His wife, who saw the attacker, described him as a big, heavy-set man. She couldn't see his face. As before, an axe was left at the scene, and the back door panel was missing. And then it just stopped. After the murder of Mike Pepitone, the Axeman of New Orleans was never heard from again. He vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. So who was he? The police never figured it out. They had no real evidence. Forensics in those days was primitive. They had no fingerprints, no DNA. All they had was a method of chiseled door panel, a brutal attack with a blunt object, usually an axe found in the house, and a specific type of victim. Most victims were Italian-American grocers. This led to the most popular theory at the time, the mafia. The theory went that this was some kind of vendetta or extortion scheme by the Black Hand, a kind of early Italian mafia. Maybe the grocers had refused to pay protection money. The brutality was meant to send a message. It was a plausible theory. There was organized crime in New Orleans, and the victims were almost all from the same community. But it doesn't quite fit. Mafia hits were usually quicker, cleaner, a gunshot in an alley, a stabbing. They weren't typically this messy, this personal. The killer entered people's homes while they were sleeping. He used their own tools against them, and he often attacked women and children. which was unusual for organized crime. The motive didn't seem to be money, it seemed to be rage. Also, the victims weren't wealthy. They were small-time shopkeepers, they weren't big players, it just didn't feel like a professional job. The police investigated dozens of people, they arrested a few, they even thought for a while that one of the victims, Louis Bassumer, might have been the killer himself, but that theory went nowhere. They were chasing shadows. The community was terrified and wasn't talking much to the police, who they didn't trust. The investigation was a failure from start to finish. Over the years, a few main suspects have emerged. The most compelling is a man named Joseph Momfrey. Momfrey was a known criminal. He had a reputation, he was allegedly involved in a black-hand extortion ring. And here's the crucial part: in December 1920, about a year after the last Axeman attack, Joseph Momfrey was shot and killed in Los Angeles. The person who shot him was a woman named Esther Albano. She was the widow of Mike Pepitone, the Axeman's last victim. Mrs. Pepitone, as she was also known, claimed she killed Momfrey in self-defense. But many believe she recognized him as the man who killed her husband and took her own revenge. After Momfrey's death, the Axeman attacks never resumed. The timing is incredibly suspicious. Was he the Axeman? Did he flee to Los Angeles after the Pepitone murder, only to be hunted down by his victim's widow? It's a very compelling story, it ties things up neatly, but there's no hard evidence. It's just a very strong theory. Mrs. Pepitone was never charged with a crime for killing him. The authorities seemed content to let it go. Other theories are out there. Some people think it wasn't one person. Maybe it was a copycat or a series of unrelated crimes that the newspapers lumped together. But the method, the chiseled door panel, is so specific, it feels like the work of one person. Some modern criminologists have looked at the case and suggested the killer was what we would now call a sexual sadist. The attacks were intensely violent, often focused on women. The axe could be seen as a phallic symbol. The killer wasn't after money, he was after the act of violence itself. He was driven by some dark psychological need. This theory moves away from the mafia idea and paints the Axeman as a lone, disturbed individual. He targeted Italian grocers not for business reasons, but maybe because he had a personal grudge against them. Maybe he was a business rival who had failed. Or maybe he had been spurned by an Italian woman. His hatred for this one group was personal. This feels closer to the truth, psychologically. The rage in these crimes feels personal. And what about that letter? Did the killer really write it? It's possible. It fits the killer's arrogance and his desire for attention. But it's also possible it was a prank. A newspaper reporter with a dark sense of humor, or just some crank trying to stir up trouble. The language is so theatrical, so over the top. I am a demon from the hottest hell. It sounds like something from a pulp novel, but whether the killer wrote it or not, it had a real effect. It turned a series of brutal murders into a piece of living theater. It gave the killer a personality, a voice. And it created one of the strangest nights in New Orleans history. The story of the Axeman endures because it's a perfect mystery. It has everything. A terrifying faceless villain, a city gripped by fear, a bizarre twist involving jazz music, a community of victims who were outsiders in their new country, and no resolution. The case was never closed. The file is still open, gathering dust somewhere. The Axeman simply walked into the city's history, committed a series of unspeakably brutal acts, wrote a crazy letter, and then walked out again. He was never caught. We will never know for sure who he was or why he did what he did. Was he a mob enforcer? A lone psychopath? A jilted lover? A demon who loved jazz? He remains a ghost, a whisper in the dark alleys of the French Quarter. His legacy is the fear he created and the strange, defiant joy of a city that chose to fight a monster with music. The story reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we never see. They are the ones who come in the night, do their terrible work, and then disappear back into the shadows, leaving only questions behind. And over a century later, we are still asking them. The Axeman is gone, but the mystery is very much alive. It's part of the fabric of New Orleans, a dark, unsettling note in the city's beautiful, chaotic song.